What's up, everybody? Dan here with Dan and Sarah Makers, and we are kicking off video number 4 for our garden shed build. We are hopefully planning on getting the rest of these pier blocks installed under our foundation walls. We will get our steel joists installed. Today's video is brought to you by a gang of wild turkeys. Wild turkeys, why not? I'm going to start cutting these steel studs, which are going to become floor joists, down to length. I'm going to use some PPE, so I've got safety glasses, I've got some leather gloves, and I've got earplugs that I'm going to use. Traditionally, a lot of people would use an angle grinder or a abrasive wheel chop saw, which I've got both of those, but because of fire concerns and sparks and things like that, I'm going to use this portaband here. The portaband still makes a decent amount of noise. It kind of chatters and whines and all that good stuff, so earplugs are still handy to have. To keep the studs from moving around too much, I'm just going to use a pair of lock-in jaw vice grips to lock to something heavy or massive, just to give me some additional support so I can use both hands on the portaband and get a good line cut. I'll measure from one end. All these studs have factory ends on one end and a cut on the other end, so I'm going to make sure I'm measuring from the factory edge so I get a nice clean square edge. I'll just use a Sharpie or one of these Milwaukee, it could be whatever brand you want, but some kind of a marker. It's going to be a lot easier to see than a pencil line on galvanized steel studs. I think we need 10 of them right now. That will help hold our front and back rim joists at the correct length, so that way they aren't bowed out and we're not setting our pier blocks at the wrong location, because like I said over and over again, those things are a real pain to put in place. A couple of real quick tips on cutting steel studs like this or just working with them. And just a note, some tape measures may have rivets that stick out or have a reinforced plate on the back side here of the hook. Obviously, when you're measuring, you want the hook to be on the very end of the material you're measuring. But sometimes, every now and again, some tape measures, that rivet will actually hook and get stuck on the end of the stud. This particular tape measure isn't too bad, but some do have that reinforced back plate. So just be aware, you want that hook on the end of your stud, or else you're going to wind up with a bunch of studs and track that's longer than you're expecting. So that's one note. With the portaband, this is very light gauge metal. You don't want to cut square across the metal. It'll jump and chatter, just like if you're using a grinder disc. Cutting square into metal like this, sheet metal or thin gauge metal, it will just wreck the blades up really fast. Grinder discs, it's like just shattering the edge off, and your grinder disc will get smaller and smaller really fast. So what you want to do is actually cut at an angle, and kind of a, I don't know the best way to do it, but basically have your blade, if the top of my square here is the blade of your grinder disc or your portaband blade, you want to cut at an angle like that. You don't want to cut like this. It'll increase the life of your blade. It won't chatter and bounce around as violently. It won't destroy your blade as quickly. I'm just about ready to start installing our floor joists here. This will hold the front and the back of the building together, so it makes it easier to square up, just because these rim joists can bow out or in or do whatever. So it'll hold it a lot more consistent. We use these, I believe I said A35s. Those are the longer Simpson clips. These are A34s, sorry, Alpha 34. So an angle 34. That is attached with 4 screws. And for these, we use these pancake head. They look like the light gauge steel stud framing screws because they are, some people call them lathing screws. But basically, let's see if we can get it to focus here. I'll probably have to move over here. Focus. Okay, so it's a pancake head screw. It's got that washer on it, basically integrated, and it's got a sharp point. So I'm using that to go into the wood. They also make them, and this is a little bit of a heavier gauge or thicker screw, and it's got the same style head, so it looks pretty much the same. It's really challenging getting these small things here. Same style of head, but on the point it's got a self-tapping point, so this will drill through steel and heavier steel. So that's what we're using to attach the joist to these Simpson brackets. The Simpson brackets already have holes. We'll utilize those, but we will tap through the steel stud. Now here's one of the offcuts of the steel stud. And basically these studs are true 6-inch, not the 5.5, so they're going to stick down a little bit on this bottom portion here. And that's fine, I don't mind. I just want the top to flush out nice here. So we'll put the stud on there, flush out the top. I'll use a locking vice grip because these things are awesome for this kind of stuff. A lot of steel stud framers will use the really small ones, but I didn't bring those out, I brought the big ones. So we'll just clamp it in place so the joist is in the correct location, and then just using an impact driver, because these are the way to go, we'll just stick it through. Make sure we don't have the sharp point, but the actual tapping screw, which I just talked about. And we'll just screw it in. We'll fill all 4 holes on this particular bracket, and that'll give us a really nice heavy shear connection. Not sure what it is engineer wise, but my gut instinct says this will be good enough. It's just a garden shed. We're not storing a library in here. So I went ahead and took a few minutes and pulled out most of the organic debris underneath here, roots, raked it out, kind of leveled it out, put the rest of the pure blocks where we need them. In this area right here, my floor is wider than I want it to be, and when I pull on it, I can't quite get it as close as I want it. I want my outside dimension to be exactly 14 feet, 0 inches. Right now I'm at 14 feet, 3/16. Is that a big deal? No, not really. But just as an example, when you're trying to work by yourself or with other people sometimes, as is the case sometimes, don't be afraid to use additional means. You know, in this case I'm working by myself. Don't be afraid to use clamps, winches, come-alongs, ratchet straps. You know, make it easy for yourself. Don't fight it. Do a good job. I use concrete forming turnbuckles a lot. to plumb and brace my walls, and most people don't even bother. So like this here, I can very easily do this all by myself. Let's see, maybe one more. Yeah, it's crushing a little bit, but I'm okay with that. I'd rather have it at the dimension I want because that makes everything else super easy. So there, we're touching. I'm gonna flush it out. Throw my clamp on there to hold it in place. All right, let's double check with our tape measure real quick. And see how we did. So I would say we are dead on 14 feet now. We've taken up that 3/16, and that is not even, I would say it's not even a 64th of an inch off. When I measured and cut for the blocking around the corner piers to level out the main frame, I did that by standing my post up and then holding our grade stick up against the post and going up and down until the bottom of the grade stick was at level, and I made a mark on the post. That allowed me to cut it and set it in place and then build our frame and just set it on top. At these midpoints, what's a little easier in my opinion is to actually, now that the frame is here, I reset my level to the top of the frame and I set my receiver over the pier block that I want to cut a post for. Here you hear a fast beep, that means I am low, and I will raise the stick up until it hits level. So you can see that this midpoint here is probably, I would say, maybe a 1/4 inch low. That, to me, means that if I measure this distance from the bottom of my joist to the top of my pier block and add that 1/4 inch gap that I have here and cut my piece, I can then lift it up slightly, slide my post base under there, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we're pretty close. So let's see if I can get my shot stick. It's right there. So for a garden shed, for a 14-foot span, even if we're out a 1/16 of an inch or whatever, it's right on that edge. I'm pretty much content with that. So that's a quick, easy way of doing it instead of trying to balance a post on top, reach down and try and draw your mark and get it in there just exactly where it needs to be. So that's how I'm going to do the rest of these. And this just in, a word from our sponsors today. Gobble, 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 gobble. And remember, chicken is most delicious at the end of November. So we've made a little bit of a engineering judgment call here. These steel joists are going to be more flobbity when they're just sitting here like this than what a wooden joist would look like.
Flobbity is a technical term.
That's Sarah over there. Flobbity is a technical term. So if you look at it, they wobble all over. If I start putting weight on it, they deflect or they bow out of location and basically they roll. They can roll where the bottom kind of curves off one way or the other way. One of the things we can do to make this floor stronger and stiffer is to put some sort of sheeting on the top and screw it down. In this case, we're going to screw it because it is steel. Screw it down with a probably like a 6 and 12 schedule of screws. That will hold the top from moving left to right, and it will make it stiffer so it's a flatter floor when load gets imposed on it. One thing additional that we could do is if this was a second floor, we would put drywall on the underside for the first floor ceiling, and that would keep the bottoms of these joists from deflecting, making it stronger. In our case, we don't want drywall, we don't want plywood. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take some of these pieces of, I guess it would be about 5/4 or 1 inch true Douglas fir offcuts that we had for milling the roof joists, and we're going to use those as what they call strapping, and we're going to basically break this up into about thirds, and we're going to stick it on the bottom side of these joists and screw it in, and that will keep the joists from being able to deflect laterally. And again, that will help stiffen up the floor even more than just the plywood on the top. So I'm going to clamp it on with the vice grip clamps, and then just screw it down through the web or the bottom flange here of this stud or floor joist into that strapping. Thanks for joining us for another episode of our garden shed build here. We are done with joists. It's looking really good. I am still loving this milled lumber that we're using. It's got nice square edges. It doesn't have that rounded corner like the lumberyard purchase stuff that you get. So it's really satisfying to use. Everything's squared up and trued up. We've got a little bit more blocking, a little bit more mesh to put up, and then we're going to get going on the deck. So remember to like, subscribe, share, leave comments, and follow us on Instagram at Dan Sarah Makers, and get out there and do something.